Welcome to the Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. President Biden addressed the Russia-Ukraine crisis from the White House yesterday. Let's play two sound bites. The first was laying out the major principles that should govern our approach to what's happening with Russia and Ukraine.
We will not sacrifice basic principles, though. Nations have a right to sovereignty and territorial integrity. They have the freedom to set their own course and choose with whom they will associate. But that still leaves plenty of room for diplomacy and for de-escalation.
And then he laid out very starkly what happens if Russia, in fact, does invade, how he will respond, and how our response this time will be different than our non-response when Russia seized Crimea.
If Russia proceeds, we will rally the world to oppose its aggression. The United States and our allies and partners around the world are ready to impose powerful sanctions on export controls, including actions that we did not pursue when Russia invaded Crimea in eastern Ukraine in 2014. We will put intense pressure on their largest and most significant financial institutions and key industries. These measures are ready to go as soon and if Russia moves.
Well, to discuss this, we are very fortunate to be joined by Garry Kasparov, the chess grandmaster, former world chess champion. He is the founder of Renewed Democracy Initiative and chairman of the Human Rights Foundation and a longtime student of Vladimir Putin. So, Mr. Kasparov, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, give me your reaction to the president's comments yesterday and what you think the state of play is right now with Russia and Ukraine.
It was a very important statement from Joe Biden because it followed shameful comments of German Chancellor Scholz, who was meeting Putin in Moscow earlier. The whole story, of this so-called Ukrainian crisis, because it's not Ukrainian crisis, it's a Putin crisis. And Putin crisis could be seen anywhere where Putin believed he had an interest, whether it's Ukraine, Republic of Georgia, Venezuela, Syria, North Korea, and of course, we should not forget and ignore his never-ending interference in the elections in the free world, United States included. So Putin never tried to hide his intentions to destroy Ukrainian sovereignty. That's why Biden's words about sovereignty, national sovereignty, was so important. It's paramount to mention that the whole story is not about Russia's security concern. It's absolute nonsense. Putin knows NATO isn't a threat to him because he's not an idiot. NATO is a defensive coalition and no threat to Russia at all. Putin didn't say anything about NATO when he invaded Ukraine in 2014. But since 2007, 15 years ago, when in Munich, he delivered his infamous speech at the security conference, he pushed his agenda to walk away from the world order that has been established after the World War II. And Putin keeps talking, never abandoned the idea of return to the spheres of influence, which meant, in his language and in his mind, that Russia had rights to control at least former Soviet republics, if not the entire Eastern Europe. And Putin wanted now to force the free world to capitulate by accepting his rights to dictate what Ukrainians can and cannot do. And that's why Biden comments were absolutely necessary to reassure Ukrainians and the free world that America is still there and America is not going to be blackmailed and bullied by Russia.
Well, you've been watching Vladimir Putin for a long time, and clearly he is a master of manipulation, and he's a master of keeping his opponents off balance. What do you think is going on right now, where it appeared last week that an invasion was imminent, and then we get the reports that they are pulling back their troops? Is this a ruse? Is he actually shifting his strategy? What is your sense about what's happening right now?
If we understand that Putin's goal is to destroy Ukrainian sovereignty and to subdue Ukraine, to make it dependent on Russia, he doesn't have to start a full-blown invasion. if he can achieve his goal by using so-called diplomacy. The trap for Ukraine is called Minsk Agreement. For me,
Mhm.
Minsk sounds like Munich in 1938. And that's why it's so bad. It's tragic when you hear German Chancellor or French President repeated this mantra. Let's go back to Minsk. We have to follow the Minsk Steinmeier formula. Steinmeier is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, now President of Germany. And the whole idea of Minsk was to let Russia use the occupied territories in eastern Ukraine. And by the way, Crimea was not even mentioned. That's already in Putin's
Mhm.
possession. The Minsk talked about these enclaves occupied by so-called Russian pro-Russian separatists. In fact, it's just Russian regulars and local bandits, and to make them part of Ukrainian political elite. So to incorporate them with special rights into the body of Ukrainian politics, and to give them more or less veto right over any
Hmm.
a future of Ukraine in Europe.
So Minsk, at least in Russian eyes, rules out Ukraine ever joining NATO. So
Oh
that's
no,
what
it's
that's
it's it's more than that. It's basically giving Putin the chance to use them as a Trojan horse to take over the entire Ukraine, because the Ukrainian state will be totally dependent on these two regions that Russia control, and by Minsk they would have to be given a special rights, and Ukraine wouldn't be able to move anywhere. But
so
but but
yeah.
even Minsk agreement, which was so favorable to Putin, he didn't think that he had to fulfill his obligations. And one of the conditions was for Russia to remove its troops and for Ukraine to restore the control of its border, and then have local elections.
So was
And
that
Putin
that yeah, yeah, I'm
does
so
no
that
intention
whole
of doing that.
so that whole episode obviously would have emboldened him to think that he could get away with, seizing Crimea, which he did. It would embolden him to think that the West was weak and divided. Joe Biden has been trying to rally the West to deter any sort of future aggression, saying we are not going to respond the same way. Do you think that the German chancellor undermined that? The German chancellor, you were very, very critical of him. He goes to Moscow and says things that you described them as his comments as an embarrassment and pathetic. So what is the role of the German chancellor? Is he undermining what Biden is trying to do? Is he emboldening and encouraging Vladimir Putin at the moment?
Absolutely. German political class is corrupt beyond imagination. You have a former German chancellor, also social democrat, who is on Putin's payroll. Gerhard Schröder
Mm.
has been serving Putin for 16 years. His successor, Angela Merkel, spent 16 years in her office doing absolutely everything to increase European dependence on Russian gas. There were numerous projects that could ease this dependence and make Europe independent from Putin's blackmail. And thanks to Germany and Angela Merkel personally, all these projects have been buried. Putin was very consistent. If you look at Putin's military activities, whether it was Republic of Georgia in 2008 or in Syria, so he always looked at the potential pipelines. For instance, in Georgia, he aggression against Georgia killed the so-called South Stream, the gas from
Mhm.
Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, to go via Georgia and Turkey to Europe. Syria, war in Syria stopped potential pipeline from Qatar that could also help to replace Russian gas. So and now it's just as with Nord Stream 2 ready to be put in exploitation. Putin doesn't need Ukrainian pipeline, so he can afford a war against Ukraine because he has an alternative pipeline. And that's all happened with the full participation of German ruling elite, whether social democrats or Christian Democrats. And unfortunately, Mr. Herr Scholz is just very much continuing these policies. He has been trying to trade Ukrainian sovereignty for cheap gas in Germany.
So what happens though if Vladimir Putin actually rolls tanks into Ukraine? Does Germany fold, or does that actually bring them back into the fold of NATO? Or does Vladimir Putin want to accomplish, his goal without actually attacking the porcupine nation of Ukraine, actually make, a kinetic attack, missiles, bombs, tanks?
Look, Putin makes decisions based on the balance of his interest and risks. Uh, um, If he doesn't attack Ukraine again now, it will be because he decided it was too risky to his fortunes at home and his actual fortunes abroad, especially in the United Kingdom. It's not because anything Ukraine or NATO do to appease him. And also, while Germany blocked every project to supply Ukraine with lethal weapons, and even recommended British planes bringing these weapons to avoid German airspace,
Hmm.
Ukraine has been armed thanks to Great Britain and, of course, to the United States that did direct transfer of military equipment to Ukraine and also encouraged allies like Baltic states to do it.
Will that be enough to deter Vladimir Putin? Because I mean that is significant military aid. I mean that really raises the opportunity cost for him to go in. He's not going to be able to just roll over Ukraine without suffering significant casualties. So, have we done enough to deter Vladimir Putin's military ambition?
It's not enough because it started too late. But the situation today is different than it was even 2 months ago. Again, Ukraine is armed now, and let's not forget, while Russia still has superior military force, Ukraine is not the Republic of Georgia. It's not separated groups of rebels in Syria. It's an army that could mobilize 4 to 500,000 soldiers, and many of them already had experience of fighting Russian aggression 8 years ago. So the cost of the aggression against Ukraine might be too high for Putin because these soldiers now have some modern weapons. They have anti-tank missiles and they have many drones. So this, if you look at the pictures, of Ukrainian sky, there are dozens and dozens of drones now patrolling it, and I'm sure many of them had a lethal weapon on them that will again rise the cost of Russian aggression. Can Putin take over Kiev if he's pushing hard? Yes, but only if he uses air power. But bombing European capital,
Hmm.
it's again politically it might be too risky. Though speaking to Scholz at the press conference, Putin reminded him, and of course all of us, about Belgrade and about NATO bombing Belgrade. And when Scholz
Hmm.
tacitly mentioned that it was a response to Serbian genocide of Kosovo population, Putin assertedly interrupted him, saying, "Oh, but we have information that there was a genocide in Donbass,"
I see.
which, yeah, which is absolute nonsense. And Scholz hasn't responded.
Well, Vladimir Putin is a master of disinformation. So when he looks at the United States, though, does he? I mean, what does he see? I mean, obviously, he thinks that we are weak and divided, and he's not necessarily wrong. You go back to the Obama administration, which responded weakly to his takeover of Crimea. Of course, then he had Donald Trump, kissing the ring for 4 years. He sees the United States clearly, politically dysfunctional and divided now. What does Vladimir Putin see when he looks at us? I guess I'm also asking, does he really understand American politics? Does he actually understand us, or does he just see us as weak and divided? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I think Putin has been surprised lately because he believed that that's what you said. America was divided. America was no longer a global player, and he thought it would be a great moment to deliver the final blow to NATO. The whole idea of his ultimatum to NATO and America that he felt confident he could issue after meeting Biden in Geneva, which by the way was a big mistake of Joe Biden,
Hmm, it
and
was okay.
that's because while Joe Biden looked into Putin's eyes, I'm sure Putin looked at his eyes, and Putin came out of Geneva fully convinced it was time to actually put NATO in the garbage bin of history.
Hmm.
The ultimatum that he issued was unequivocal. So NATO basically should stop enlargement and also cease its activities in Eastern Europe to leave them at Putin's mercy. And it's not accidental that after so many years of weakness, and you pointed out Obama
Mhm.
administration, it's not just Ukraine,
Good.
it's Syria, and also their attempts to start a reset, ignoring Putin's aggression against the Republic of Georgia, and many other acts that could be qualified as very unfriendly, and the unwillingness of Obama administration to consider Russia as an adversary. We all remember how Obama made fool of Mitt Romney, who said Russia was America's geopolitical foe
I
number
do
one.
remember.
And Mitt Romney was right. Obama was wrong. I never heard him apologizing for this faithful mistake that actually, again, emboldened Putin to move elsewhere in the world where he saw he could make gains, political or material gains. We're talking about now Ukraine, and I mentioned Syria, Venezuela. Let's not forget Africa. Russia
Hmm.
feels that it could now install friendly governments, corrupt governments in Africa using paramilitary forces, again, because America was not there. So we had so many complaints and outcries about America being a global policeman. Yeah, okay, America is no longer there, but now when sheriff is out of town, the bad guys are running the streets.
So I want to circle back to a comment you made earlier. You said this is not Ukraine's crisis; it's Russia's crisis, Vladimir Putin's crisis. You had a piece over the weekend in the New York Daily News where you pointed out that for all of the saber rattling, that Russia is still a gas station with nukes. That it's got young, educated people fleeing its COVID response among the worst in the world. Disinformation army spread anti-vax propaganda all over the U.S. So, I mean, give me when you talk about the Russian crisis. Just flesh that out for me. Exactly, what Vladimir Putin is facing domestically at home.
Oh, he's facing disaster because Russia's economy is in terrible shape, and
You call it a
exporting gas.
mafia state. You
It's
call it
a
a
mafia.
mafia. Yeah.
It's a mafia state, and mafia needs sources of income because they don't produce anything. They can only tax. Uh, they can steal, and they keep benefiting from Russia's enormous natural resources, and of course the willingness of the free world to buy them. That's how Russian economy has been functioning, and that's why the making Europe dependent on Russian gas was Putin's top priority. And it's very unfortunate that he had powerful enablers across European continent.
Hmm.
Um, and also, Putin, while recognizing the Russia is not in the position to compete with the free world. It's not even the Soviet Union that tried to compete. We had Soviet Union had some space programs and science. So there, of course, the communist ideology proved to be inferior to the ideology and concepts of the free world, liberal democracy, market economy. But Putin's Russia is a mafia state, and he recognizes that the way to stay in power is to force the free world to accept his rights to rule the way he wants, and also it's to spread this acceptance to any other dictator in the world. Putin, in my view, represents an existential threat to the concept of the free world because while over decades we have been moving towards more tolerance, accepting other views, looking for consensus and reducing violence, all elements of violence, both in our social life and in resolving political crisis. Putin and others like him, all these thugs and terrorists and dictators around the world, they're moving in the opposite direction. So we are just so far apart, and no diplomacy can bridge this difference because Putin sees the world very differently. This is a 19th century, if not earlier, view of the world, and it cannot be reconciled with what we expect in the 21st century.
So, what do you make of this weird alliance romance between Vladimir Putin and some of the right wing figures like Tucker Carlson? Something I'm old enough to remember when conservatives in the United States would have been, very, very suspicious and hostile to Russia. But now you have elements of Fox News that seem to be Russian television propaganda. What do you make of this? Is this something that he has cultivated? Is it something else going on? Is it just sort of an appetite for authoritarianism? What is your sense?
Um, Look, the danger of growing Putin's influence around the world is comes from his willingness to embrace any group that is threatening the status quo, that group that is disturbing the political balance in the free world. While the communist regime had very little options to work with radical groups in the West,
Hmm.
mainly concentrating on these peace movements and leftist and far leftist groups. Putin can embrace both far right and far left.
Hmm.
He doesn't care, whether they promote radical fascist ideas or radical communist ideas. So it's not just America. If you look at European continent, in France, Putin is supported both by the far right candidate Eric Zemmour, but also by Mélenchon on the far left. In Germany, Putin enjoys support of Die Linke, the far left group, former communist, and AfD, neo-Nazi group. And that's why I'm not surprised when you see Tulsi Gabbard appearing on Tucker Carlson's show, because they both, see Putin as someone who is, for different reasons, helps them to see the world through their lenses.
Well, it is the sort of the illiberals on the right and the left at some point seem to coalesce.
Yes,
It
absolutely.
is a hostility or suspicion of liberal democracy itself,
Exactly,
and
absolutely, absolutely, and Putin makes noises that could satisfy both. So he's playing his cards, and again, he's flexible, and he is what I call merchant of doubt.
a
He's not
merchant
selling
of doubt.
ideology, which made him far more dangerous and poisonous than Soviet propaganda, because he doesn't have to convince you that it's something that he's doing is good. Basically, he's saying, "Oh, we're all the same." And unfortunately, he finds enablers like Tucker Carlson or equivalents in the far left. And again, it's quite a long list of people that are less known than Tucker Carlson because they don't have the same audience, same size audience, but they are no less dangerous.
Well, this is an important point because the whataboutism is part of our culture, but I think you and others have pointed out this is also central to Vladimir Putin's disinformation is to convince everyone that we're all the same. And I think one of the really sort of kind of seminal moments of the last few years was when, and you'll remember this when President Donald Trump was asked, well, about Vladimir Putin, well, Vladimir Putin's a killer, and he says, well, we kill lots of people too. Well, we're not so good. Basically, you have the president of the United States internalizing the kind of whataboutism that we would have associated with the Russian propaganda rather than an American president. You remember that moment? I mean, that really was where you had Donald Trump channeling Vladimir Putin's whataboutism.
Absolutely. But also, let's not forget that Obama wanted to apologize for American actions. That was his pitch during his first term. So it's the Donald Trump whataboutism also resonated on the left. So it's quite unfortunate that we had Donald Trump, or before him, Barack Obama, elected to the highest position in the free world, while they never shared our beliefs that
Huh.
in American exceptionalism and in the superiority of our democracy. And of course, you didn't expect them, especially Donald Trump, to defend it. So Trump's admiration to dictators was so apparent, and it could tell you everything about his mentality. So you had, feckless Obama administration and reckless Trump administration, and the damage caused to America over 12 years is very hard to repair. And frankly speaking, Joe Biden administration didn't have a strong start, though
Mm.
now they act better than I expected.
Okay, so you referred to Putin as a merchant of doubt, but you also made an interesting point in your op-ed piece that he's no chess player, that he won't move until he's sure that he can claim victory. So, talk to me about that because I think sometimes people in the West look at Vladimir Putin and they see this really cunning Machiavellian, but you're saying this guy's not really a chess player. What do you mean?
Yeah, I always have to defend the integrity of my beloved game, and in chess we have rules, and also you have 100% available information. I don't know about your plans, what is being cooked in your head, but I could see all your pieces. I know exactly what kind of material you have to inflict damage on my position. Putin's game, if you call it a game, it's more likely poker. He
Hmm.
may win by having a very weak hand if he is arrogant enough to bluff. And the bluff means that you have to raise the stakes. And that's where Putin is superior to his counterpart in the free world. So many times,
Hmm.
Putin won by bluffing because the opponents folded the cards.
So, is geopolitics today, is it chess or is it poker, Gary?
It's unfortunately it's more and more poker. It's no offense meant, but the problem again with poker is that it gives an advantage, unfair advantage to dictators and all form of thugs around the world because they are less constrained. They don't care about parliament. They don't care about public opinion, about free press. So they can make moves and bluff while the opposition on our side in the free world has to take in account all these factors. So an attempt of the free world to play chess by the rules. And on the other side, it's a push to change the game into poker. It's
Hmm.
turn everything into a geopolitical casino, and that's what Putin wants. Oh, you want gas? Okay, but what about Ukraine? What about Minsk? So he can move from one point to another. He doesn't care because he makes decisions single handedly. It's Russia today is a personalized dictatorship that openly embraces fascist ideology, both domestically and internationally. So that's why seeing Scholz, Macron meeting Biden or speaking to Biden over the phone, so Putin can react instantly while all Western leaders, whether we agree with them or not, they know that they have their responsibilities, their obligations. Certain things are mandatory. So even Biden cannot make all the decisions. He has to go through the process. And while playing poker, it gives Putin a huge advantage because his response is quicker and very often it's a decisive factor.
So, as you know, I have been a huge fan and have quoted you many, many, many times over the last 5 or 6 years, including in my book and in other in columns. Your famous tweet from December 13th, 2016, which I'm looking at right now, has 66,000 retweets, and you wrote back in 2016. The point of modern propaganda isn't only to misinform or push an agenda, it is to exhaust your critical thinking, to annihilate truth. I feel like we've been living through that. You called that shot back in
Yeah.
2016. And really, this is the moment where we're at now where people look around and you say, what is true? What do I believe? Who do I listen to anymore? After all this time, have we figured this out yet? Because I don't think that we have. We're living through it, but we don't understand that the point of modern propaganda is not to convince you that A is true or B is true. It is to annihilate truth. It's to make you doubt your ability to know what is true. That one tweet seems to sum up our time so thoroughly.
Uh, Unfortunately, we are far from winning this game. And Putin has succeeded in annihilating the truth because we have doubts. And today, America is so badly divided that the truth is what you hear from your favorite channel.
Yeah.
And it's no longer the quality of information. So if you are listening to MSNBC, that's the truth. If you're listening to Tucker Carlson, that's the truth. And Americans lost an ability to hear each other, to compromise, to actually understand that there is a truth somewhere in the middle. And we have to give credit for Putin and his KGB run operation that they succeeded in weakening the free world way beyond any damage inflicted by Soviet Union during the Cold War, because the enemy is within now. And while during the Cold War there were certain things that both parties and most Americans agreed upon, right now I don't think you can just find a consensus on some key issues.
No.
And also, it's kind of schizophrenia. It's cognitive dissonance when you look at the front page of the FoxNews.com and you have the words of Tucker Carlson. So blaming Biden for not giving Putin what he wanted and just calling him a warmonger, and then you have just another traditional Republican saying, "Oh, Biden is too weak on Putin." And
Yeah.
and these two articles that are just one to another. Same happens on the left.
Yeah.
You have
Cog-
accusation of Biden being too weak and timid, and also far left claiming that Biden continues with neoconservative politics.
A little bit of cognitive dissonance there. So, One of the criticisms that I get, and that I think is legitimate, is that okay, we understand the problem, we understand how terrible things are, and people say, but give us some hope, give us some idea. Are there initiatives out there that are actually making things better? That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about because you are very involved with this Renew Democracy initiative, and you have something new. I really wanted to ask you about it. This new program called the Front Lines of Freedom, and this is a course. Tell me if I got this right. It's a course at Johns Hopkins recently that you presented that Foundation of Freedom course at Johns Hopkins, and it featured dissidents and activists around the world teaching people about the fundamentals of democracy and dictatorship, as well as freedom and unfreedom. And you're now hoping to expand that. I mean, is this one of the antidotes to what we have been discussing for the last half hour?
I hope so. It all started with the letter that was published on CNN, the program that our joint program with CNN called Voices of Freedom, signed by 52 dissidents from 28 oppressive countries. And the idea of the letter was to point out that America today, still today, with all the problems that we describe now, with all this in-house fighting, it's still the freest country in the world. And while many of us saw America years ago, decades ago, as the beacon of freedom, uh, even today, millions and millions of people worldwide are looking at America as the only hope to bring freedom and prosperity to the world, even today. And we thought that this letter could lead to a program that we hope will spread around US colleges because while Americans are very good on just on pointing out at the ills of modern
Hmm.
American society, and of course everybody is looking back at American history and points out old evil like slavery and many imperfections that caused significant social and political damage in America. We think it's fundamentally important, it's absolutely crucial to explain to this young audience, especially young audience, that at every given point, America, from the moment America was formed as a state nearly 250 years ago, America was the leading force for democracy in the world. Yes, we know that in 1787, when the Constitution was written, many things that were promised they did not cover the whole American society. Slavery
Hmm.
was there, women didn't have voting rights. Absolutely terrible. But point me the country where these rights, were respected. Again, America had an ability, thanks to founding fathers and to the documents that they penned more than 2 centuries ago, to resolve all these crises one by one domestically without any foreign intervention. And when today we hear, oh, America is oppressive, if you keep claiming that the US is in some way fundamentally oppressive, as many are saying, especially on the left,
Hmm.
you'll be giving a gift to dictators around the world who can turn to their opponents, to us, to dissidents, saying, oh, democracy is no better than autocracy. And American democracy is the same as Chinese authoritarianism, or even worse. So the message that we are communicating, yes, you should talk about problems in America. You should point out at issues like police brutality. But it's a problem here, while police brutality is a system in many parts of the world, because only 20% of the population of on our planet today, by the Freedom House ranking, live in a free countries. By the way, when we're doing these programs, we always hear, "Oh, do you count America as a free country?"
Oh
It's
my.
just it's mind blowing. I mean, go and live elsewhere. This is
Yeah.
this. It's the we want Americans, again, especially young Americans, to understand that they enjoy freedom that's unseen in most of the world, and people are willing to die even for the glimpse of the hope of having these freedoms in many quarters, in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe, if you count Belarus or Russia, and Asia.
Well, I think what's striking about this is in the course that you taught at Johns Hopkins, it featured, activists from Venezuela, Iran, Zimbabwe, Uyghurs who had been imprisoned in the camp, and really it helps Americans to see the U.S. through their eyes. That we're sitting around, reading the 1619 Project about how oppressive America is, and these folks are saying, "Oh, you want to know what real oppression looks like? This is what real oppression looks like." Plus, remind us that during their darkest days that the American democracy actually inspired them. So, your point that the authoritarians would like to be able to cite people who talk about how oppressive we are, but also divided societies are easier to subdue. So obviously it's in their interest to sow dissension. And if I can just get a little ahead, I mean, one of the things that I really like about what you're doing here is that you're essentially saying, look, you need to understand that if we really do think this is an existential threat to democracy, we might have to work with people you don't like. You're going to have to prioritize this broader struggle for democracy over your personal policy preferences. And that ego is the enemy of unity, that we need to actually do that. And that's kind of tough, isn't it? These days to be able to say, okay, there are things we differ on, but can we focus on the threat that's right in front of us now?
Absolutely. That's the main idea behind this course. American democracy is worth fighting for, and it's still, the freest country in the world that offers opportunities to our people of all creeds, no matter race, gender, ethnicity. America, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But there's no perfection in this universe. But is as US dollar is a reserve currency in the world, not because it's strong, but because it's stronger than any other currency. So that's American democracy. And hearing from people who survived the hell of Uyghurs concentration camps. We're talking about concentration camps. The story of this woman who was sterilized and who survived by miracle the horrors in 21st century of Uyghur concentration camp that remind us only of Holocaust. That's a message, but the problem is, it's this is we still American corporations that are so vocal about social justice in America, and they see no problems of collecting money from Chinese government. So, or Leopoldo Lopez, who spent 7 years in military prison in Venezuela, or Pastor Ivan Mavariri, who spent years in Zimbabwe prison, in Zimbabwe. So these people talk about freedom because they earn their rights to talk about freedom. This is not, outcries, in the college campuses. Oh, America is oppressive. I mean, hell, you don't know what oppression is.
No, I don't think they have any idea, but the hypocrisy of the American corporations who are woke domestically, but completely indifferent when it comes to the Chinese genocide is striking. I noticed that you are interested in a lot of other issues. We've been talking about Ukraine, we've been talking about democracy. You were also interested in, and this may seem like a digression, but I don't think it is. You were also interested in what happened in San Francisco last night, where the members of the school board turned out to be way too progressive, way too woke, even for San Francisco. They were recalled with more than 70% of the vote. Put this into some context. What happened in San Francisco?
It's a backlash. I think that's after these tragic events in 2020. So was George Floyd, and the country was pushed in one direction, and it was pushed too hard. And this tragedy had been used by the far left to install their agenda. Afghanistan, in Venezuela, in Russia, in Belarus. It's a long list. I'm happy to see American activists, fighting for their rights here.
And
But
especially in San Francisco. I mean, it's interesting that in one of the most liberal communities in the entire country, they decided this was crazy. The schools are shut down, and the school board spent its time trying to rename what more than 40 schools. And as you point out, it really was an attempt to denigrate and rewrite American history, to basically say that our history was so tainted that we needed to take all of this time and all of this effort in order to erase it. And the fact that the even fellow progressives said this was crazy, this was too much is an interesting political moment for us, isn't it?
hopefully maybe that's a point of reconciliation. That's the idea of our program, is just to rally Americans behind the American values. And again, recognizing imperfection of American democracy, but also recognizing its invaluable contribution to democracy worldwide. And
Fascinating.
I can only hope that the common sense will prevail and people from both sides will get together and form a strong center that will be in the position to deflect all the attacks coming from the radicals, whether they come from the right or the left.
Garry Kasparov, as you know, is a former world chess champion, the founder of the Renew Democracy Initiative, chairman of the Human Rights Foundation. Garry Kasparov, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for the conversation.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll do this all over again.